if leaders are comfortable that what they are doing, what they have said, the example that they've set, the behavior that they routinely demonstrate is without question, that leader is guaranteed to stumble.
Welcome back to Stepwise, a series of juicy conversations with exceptional leaders about their journeys and their wisdom. Last week, we were privileged to meet retired U.S. Army General Spider Marks, who shared lessons from his 42 years' experience in military and corporate settings. It was a series of hard-earned lessons for leaders. So let's continue it. Here's part 2 of my conversation with Spider Marks. Since our last conversation, anything come to mind? Any particular area of this conversation about leadership that you'd like to start on?
The thing that comes to mind is that you cannot choose your conditions. You can help shape those conditions. But very often we are confronted with circumstances that are incredible, what I would call ambushes. We weren't intellectually prepared for them, or maybe we were prepared in some way. But the key ingredient of any leader is to ensure that you approach the wild swings in a way that you would approach what I would call the very calm seas. Mm-hmm. You've got to be able to do it both ways and be effective. So how do you have the right folks? A priori, how do you choose the right folks? That's the key to every discussion about leadership is the term, the right folks in the right seat on the right bus and all that. I got all that. What that is you're trying to find individuals with character that embrace the same values as what you're trying to purport and maybe extend beyond your immediate reach. And how you do that is so incredibly artful. I think there's an element of science to it, but it's mostly art in my mind. You cannot afford to bring on board your team, and history shows you that when you bring individuals on your team that reflect your behavioral instincts, kind of your biases, maybe your scar tissue as well, your experience base, you end up with groupthink. And that's so incredibly dangerous. We see it politically, we see it economically. We tend to mirror image. You look outside, you look outside into the world, and what you see is you see what you want to see in many cases, and that's the challenge that we end up with. So who are those contrarians that you consciously bring on board your team, who still share the same values? They still want to have the same outcome, but they also view the world entirely differently from you, and therefore will provide the pressure that's going to be necessary for the decisions of this group or the leader individually to enjoy some level of success. I want to draw a word picture of what we're trying to achieve. Then everybody fill in the blanks of this mosaic of what we're trying to get done. That's the critical selection. That's your first vote in terms of bringing somebody on board the team. When two examples. One is when I went to combat, and one is artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence. The combat example. When the nation called me, the Army called me and said, "Hey, Marks, you're going to be the senior intel guy. We're going to go to war in Iraq. We don't know necessarily when, but here are some of the objectives. Let's get going and galvanize your team." The first person, and so my question back to my bosses was, what flexibility do I have? Do I just inherit the team that's going to go to war? Am I going to be able to build the team a little bit? I want to embrace those that are there. I want to expand on some skill sets. Just initial thoughts. They said, no, you're going to have not a blank check, but you're going to be able to start to build a team. This is the nation going to war. This is priority number one. If you need something, you got to let us know. We're going to do the best we can to get it. The very first vote that I had for a guy to join my team was as different from me as night and day. Now, I knew this guy from before, and I loved him immensely. I absolutely admired this guy, but his creativity, his confidence, his desire to achieve the maximum output, his intolerance of half steps in terms of trying to find solutions. And I find myself to be far more accommodating. He was not. I absolutely realized that I was going to get a guy that was going to be different in terms of his approach of what we were trying to achieve than mine would be. And end of the day, it was magical. It was magical because of him, not because of me. It was magical because of what he was able to bring to the table and the folks that he was able to galvanize and how he did that. He was one of the most selfless. All those other characteristics were true, but he was one of the most selfless guys. Second example, AI. As a leader, I look at AI, and somebody asked me the other day, Marks, when you look at AI, one word answer, is it a plus or is it a minus? I said it's a plus. Not because I'm blindly optimistic and naive or I want it to be a plus.
Accommodating.
Yeah, because you could, and we all know that AI could be the worst thing that ever happens to us.
Sure.
Like, it's going to displace us. It's going to validate whatever it wants to validate. It's going to generate its own images of the world. We're going to make political decisions, commit billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, potentially toward things that clearly are just non-existent in terms of the magnitude of the challenge. Or they may be far greater than we see. And AI is going to soften the blow, if you will, the perception. I see the upside of AI, the great positivity of AI. But much like a military operation, if I feel positive about something, if I think this is what we need to do, and I've got the data that facilitates or at least allows me to make this decision, I'm going to spend every other ounce of my energy and intellect on all those people that are going to poke holes on that decision. In other words, AI, I think, is going to be incredibly positive, but I want to have an array. I want an army of folks challenging every one of the assumptions or outcomes of AI so that we can make sure that we can maximize that capability. The point really of those two examples in my mind is, what are those voices that you require, not encourage, but require to be whispering in your ear, or to be very loudly in public telling you that here are some thoughts that you need to embrace before we go forward. Once the decision's been made, you will find no more loyal member of the team than me. But behind those closed doors, I will tell you if I think you're naked, if I think you're idiotic, if I think you're moving in the wrong direction, and I will do that at risk, and I will piss you off. I know it. But when the decision is made, I'm the most loyal dude on the team, provided those are legal, ethical, moral decisions. Of course, if it's illegal, I'm not going. I'm not having the conversation. I think that's the key ingredient. In other words, I think we discussed last time the notion of vulnerability. That's an acknowledgement of vulnerability.
You know, Spider, you speak articulately about talent and the importance of character and the alignment of all of that to the overall goal. I want to factor in a couple of things that are challenging today, which is I read something, I don't know, a week or so ago that said about 1/3 of Gen Z employees, and that's the next big wave into the workplace, only 1/3 of them have any interest in ever supervising another human being, because they're two things. One, their distrust of systems and structures like government, like banks, like schools is at an all-time low. And the second factor is this notion about each of them have as much concern about their personal brand and their personal takeaway, if you will, as they do on the institution's brand or takeaway. I wonder how your thoughts go to how do we, like, got a whole wave of Gen Z people coming in the workplace. And while I fundamentally believe in alignment, vulnerability, all of that, I mean, that's core to who I am. Like, how do you factor this new thing in?
Yeah, and it's not just into the workplace. It's into the
No.
leadership, it's into the leadership space. It's into our national security apparatus. It's into the governance. It's into the structure that embeds that is defined by our Constitution. This is a major challenge. What you've described is a major challenge. And the point you made is so poignant, which is it's the individual brand at the expense of everybody else's brand.
Yeah.
I simply don't get that. And I don't think it's because I have white hair and I've been around for 7 decades. I think what this is are you, not you, or are we individually prepared to sacrifice individually? And I'm not talking about necessarily making the ultimate sacrifice, but
Sure.
in many cases that's the case. But are we prepared to sacrifice? Is our society prepared to sacrifice, to stand up when the larger good is at risk? I don't question that. Every generation has produced great women and men that have reached out and said, I can shape this environment, I can change this environment, and I'm going to make an effort to do that. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
But are we at a point now where that is at risk based on data that we're seeing right now, where folks are saying, I don't want to be in charge of anybody. It's all about me. We had this discussion before. I want to take selfies.
Yeah.
No, I want more selfies. Why do I want to look at the world? I want the world to look at me. And you go, wow, okay. At some point, your lack of trust, you're gonna have to alter the level of distrust you have with all those agencies, the banks, the education system, the hospitals, the government, the tax requirements, our economic regulatory environment, et cetera. You're going to have to alter that because at some point, I guarantee you're not going to be satisfied with the result if you don't. Chaos.
That's a beautiful thought. This notion of trust. And so let's double down on that. At some point, all of us, I think, that operate in any society, whether we're on the fringe or right in the core, have to trust something.
Right.
I know my Starbucks is going to be open at 5 a.m. I trust.
Right.
Get a good cup of coffee there in the morning as I blah, blah, blah. Who knows?
And I trust that my Apple Pay, when I blink and I buy that Starbucks, it's going to work. And there's going to be money behind this little magical box. And
oh man, you are so far in advance of me. I'm still trying to figure out that Apple Pay thing.
but there it is. And so you don't have trust for the banking system. You don't have trust for the education, but I still want my latte, whatever, fill in the blank.
Yep. So the challenge on leaders is if trust is the key in something, and I have little parentheses here too, I'll cover in a second. But if trust is the thing, and you're looking for high character people, how does a leader then begin to build trust in these non-traditional ways that used to be the institution conveyed an awful lot of it? If I'm a young enlisted man, I go into the Army trusting that I can serve my country, and B, the people there know how to put me in position and prepare me to serve my country. I trust that.
Right.
Outside the military now, I'm entering the workforce, kinda, maybe. And I don't really trust, big institutions. So I'm going to create the brand called me. And yet I have a lot of talents. I have a lot of capabilities if I can get aligned to a similar group of thinkers, and I work for a leader who does what? What does that leader do to help me reframe and be part of that? As opposed to just saying, that's just one of those Gen Zers with the Apple Pay and the, lattes and who shows up at work at 10 o'clock.
True.
What's the leader's response to all that?
Yeah, the leaders, I think, well, first of all, there's a structure into which these, and we're not talking just about Gen Zers, but we're talking about leadership at large. There's a structure into which individuals will enter. You're not simply going to be on your own, or that Apple Pay goes away, or there's an element of trust that you have with whoever your benefactor is.
Yeah.
So I think the point I'm making is that leaders understand that they can build teams to really exceed expectations, which is what it's really all about. I just don't want to bring folks on board and I will expect that there will be exceptionalism and we will be able to achieve, we'll be able to, our reach will exceed our grasp. But I have to be able to create small elements of success within that. And I may accept, in many cases, the bare minimum standard from individuals, which is unfortunate. And based on conditions, those bare minimums may be enough for me to say goodbye to those individuals at some point.
Sure.
Pressure. In other words, you cannot hide in this organization. But I also understand that if your desire is to meet the bare minimum and perform appropriately within that bare minimum, I may be able to accept that. But how do I achieve that minimal standard?
Yeah.
And that is, again, creating a clear understanding for every member of that team that there is an element, I'll be very frank here, there's an element of pain associated with not meeting the standard. However they want to personally.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
However you want to articulate what that pain point is.
Yeah.
But I need you on board. I really am expecting and I'm demanding the best you can give, but if the best you can give is a minimal standard, I'm going to embrace that. But you need to understand that you have very little room to maneuver below that. So how do I as a leader define what that looks like? In other words, the world encourages the best from individuals. Many will strive to achieve those goals and objectives. And I don't think that's just simple personal wiring. People are wired differently, but there certainly is an incentive for that person to achieve the next objective and the next objective and the next objective, whether they want to be in charge of anybody or not, but they're at that level. I equate that to the world-class athlete. Like, wow, that person's not in charge of herself over the course of 26 miles. I want you to run the fastest marathon you can. You go, where do people like that come from? But they can't lead a silent prayer, but they can do a phenomenal job achieving goals and objectives that the average human simply cannot. How does the leader create the conditions for incentives? Mostly, clearly, the thing that's going to modify behavior is when there is a clear pain point, it's described, it's personalized, and it's identified. I hate to say that, but I mean, that truly is what it's all about. Human behavior is altered as a result of pain, not pleasure.
Fabulous. There's another thought that has surfaced recently. I was so compelled by this notion. I don't even know what it means yet, but I'd love to run it by you and get your reaction because it has to do with teams. These days, now I do a lot of work in healthcare. So the pandemic brought out this notion of traveling nurses and traveling docs that could make triple the amount of money if they were willing to go on temporary assignments to, I'm going to go, they need a nurse in Fort Lauderdale, I'm going to go. And instead of me making 80 grand a year, I'm going to make $250,000 a year and they're going to give me a per diem living expense. And I'm going to do that for 3, 4, 5 months. And then I'm going to go somewhere else. So it is in that spirit that I heard the term, your team is whoever's in the room.
Right.
which kind of blows up my notions about stability, and you build them over time, and you have a chance to vet over time and to groom and to make sure there's values alignment. Now it is much more rapid paced, at least in healthcare, and I'm assuming in other parts of our society. Your team's whoever's around you. Now, what does a leader do? How does a leader quickly align? I love the idea of pain and consequence. That's not talked often enough about in leadership circles. I believe it's absolutely true. But what does a leader do to rapidly align, learn about, work with whoever's in the room?
I love the term. You know, my team's in the room. I think that's how you said it.
Your team is whoever's in the room.
Your team is whoever's in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And a question I have is, obviously what you described is you've described kind of first responders, healthcare providers. Selflessness is kind of a foundational characteristic of folks that are in that world. But what you described was not altruism. You described I'm chasing dollars.
Exactly.
Chasing dollars. But I've got a level of professionalism that allows me to chase those dollars.
Excellent. Yes.
There's no difference between that and a professional soccer team or a professional football team. The team are the folks who are in the locker room. You know, like where'd you come from? Well, I just got traded from the Washington Commanders to the San Francisco 49ers.
Yep.
Level of professionalism is you've been in the sport, you meet the criteria, you know what we're all about, et cetera, et cetera. You're new to this team, but we have a new team as a result of your inclusion. That's kind of one of the things that the leader, I think, needs to realize is that when a team, the team is the folks you have in the room, which means at any instance, every member of that team could be brand new.
Yep.
New to that room to include the leader, which means you have a team that has never existed before.
Right.
This is not a new team. This is our team. This team was completely blown up, came back together in some capacity.
Yeah.
Unlike the team the next day, where nurse number one, he decides he's got a better gig someplace else. He departs, nurse number two shows up and replaces him. Now we have a new team. We don't have a new member of the team. We have a new team.
Yep.
In other words,
Great point.
In other words, whether the entire team is being reconfigured by numbers or a single element, a single contributor joins that team, this is a new team, a team that did not exist the day before.
Mm-hmm.
That, I think, is the mindset of a leader.
Yeah.
That level of fluidity. In other words, when I've used this example before, LeBron James has migrated from different teams.
Yep.
When he went to the Miami Heat, do you think the head coach said, "Hey guys, we got a new member of the team. Could you please stand up? His name's LeBron." I think the coach probably said, "Hey guys, we got a new team.
Yeah.
We got a new team. LeBron is on the new team, and we're going to create the conditions for everybody in this to excel. Everybody in this room is going to be able to excel because we've got LeBron, we've got Spider, we've got Foster, we've got That's the thing I think is most important about leaders is if they can realize their fundamental job is to maximize assume it's not like you have your team in the room is not like a bunch of hooligans who show up who can't do what they expect. There's a level of professionalism. So let's just agree that those are the table stakes. You got to know what you're doing. You got a pro, you're a card carrying, licensed, certified professional at what you do. And then the leader walks in and says, our team. Okay, everybody in here knows exactly what you're supposed to do in your world. However, your world now involves her over there and her over there and this person over there. And you've done that before with different faces. And the ergonomics are probably quite similar. But folks, we understand that it's about us making this happen. This team is ours, and it could change at any moment if we end up with some other individual in the team not participating. It's just like it's like in combat. You got 11-man squad. One person goes down, it takes 4 people off the squad. You're automatically at 7. You got your injured person, and generally 2 or 3 people to get her or him out of there. One person goes down, we have an entirely new team.
Yeah.
We've got scar tissue, we've got trust, but when you are now executing a task without any preconditions, like you've described in the doctors and healthcare professionals that migrate, and the second you walk in the room, this team doesn't have any individual or any team scar tissue. It's got deep individual professionalism, but it doesn't have the team identity. The team identity is being created instantly. Those are elements of trust, because nurse A and nurse B have to work side by side and have to complement each other. That happens. The leader must assume that that is going to happen and must set the conditions for that to happen instantaneously. There can't be a gap. Does that make sense?
That does. And Spider, you're talking about a couple of really cool things. One is this level of professionalism, and I'd love to come back there. Second one, though, is, and the fact that it is our team. That's a whole different mindset than what we were taught in business school years ago, where the leader has the power and they create the job descriptions and they hire the people for those spots and they know what great performance looks like. It's really kind of top-down, power over kind of thing. Most of the leaders I talk to today will say, of course, I can make a call at any time. I can say we're going north and we're going north. But more times than not, I don't have to do that, because I create this sense of ownership that allow people to have some say in all of that, which would seem to be kind of important in today's day and age with the folks we got in the workplace. And then the other thing that it seems to be implied in all of this is, I don't know if it's continuous, but it might be. But leader as communicator, leader as meaning maker, leader as aligner, leader as standard bearer until, like at least minimum standards until the group adopts themselves. Am I hearing that right?
You are. Yeah, absolutely. The notion of a leader that has a team that is, it's not amorphous, but it's a living, breathing. It just is moving all the time. I mean,
dynamic. Yeah, you said before dynamic. Yeah.
Truly, adjusting to the environment and hopefully shaping the environment all the time. And so the leader's obligation with that level of professional expectations, there are expectations. You walk into the room. This is I'm going to the emergency room that you just described. Yep. I've never seen any of these faces before, because we all just showed up last night and we all came on shift at 0200. And I'm looking at all these new faces, which means I'm not going to go around and say, show me your certs, show me your license.
Yeah.
Number one, there's an expectation that you're all here because you're professionals. But the other thing is that as a leader, I'm going to set boundaries. And the boundaries, there's a lot of green between the boundaries on a pool table, right? There's a lot of different ways you can drop the ball in the hole. And so in that environment, I'm going to let these 2 nurses, one who's the, pre-admissions nurse, and then the nurse that's going to, who's working with the anesthesiologist. I'm going to let them kind of figure out what type of connection takes place, because they know what needs to be done. I don't have to get to that level of detail. But the boundaries might be, this handoff needs to take place within 7 minutes.
Yeah.
We can't afford to have, the admissions nurse taking her time, doing whatever.
Right.
We've got to be able to have, so within that, guys, make it work. That immediately is an acknowledgement of trust. So the leader is setting the boundaries. So leader as communicator. Yep. but the DNA is being demonstrated and reinforced by the individuals within the team. They've already embraced it.
But talked about this notion of vulnerability. I know you referenced it today. Leaders setting expectations, expecting others to behave in trustworthy ways, to build trust among our teammates with standards. And I know we're at time, but love to kind of have your last thoughts on this one. What is what's the relationship between a leader's vulnerability and all of the stuff we're talking about? Setting boundaries, clearly communicating standards, vetting for the right kind of character, high character people, adapting to change. What's all that got to do with vulnerability?
Oh, my goodness, that is the description of vulnerability, right? Have I made the right decision on this particular hire? Have I made the right decision in terms of the vision that I've endorsed? It's not my vision.
Yeah.
It's our vision for this organization. Have I made the right decision on endorsing that? Is there a practical and attainable way that we can realize that vision? That is the definition of vulnerability. Leaders, if leaders are comfortable that what they are doing, what they have said, the example that they've set, the behavior that they routinely demonstrate is, without question, that leader is guaranteed to stumble. You can't be comfortable in that role. You should be questioning your place in this organization. Somebody knighted you and put the sword on your shoulder and said, you are hereby the leader of this organization. You go, wow, heavy lies the crown. Does this make sense, guys? Are we doing well? That doesn't mean you have to rub your hands together and not move forward confidently in decisions. But you should be aware of the fact at every moment that there is a challenge to the structure and the approach that you have taken to lead this organization, and the assumption must be you're surrounded by talent that agrees with what you're trying to achieve. It is the rare exception, yet it takes up most of our energy, and it takes up a lot of our publications in terms of that aberrant behavior.
Yeah.
Yet that is not really the example is, wow, look at this organization. Look at what we've been able to achieve and how we gel together, even though we might have just had an opportunity to meet each other and shake hands 15 minutes ago.
Well, and you've talked about the importance of that leader being open to feedback. You talked about your first hire as somebody who differed in style, differed in how he communicated expectations, held people to account. It's to me, this notion of vulnerability that you talk about, that's full contact sport. That's being open, listening, asking, how am I doing? Getting feedback, being open to it, being willing to grow and learn, being willing to admit you're not the end all and be all, but the group's task is. Those are all very important and powerful and courageous kind of acts of leading.
And at the same time, immense pressures from outside, public pressure, social pressure, board of directors pressure, maximization of output. And at the same time, you do an about face and you look at your organization, you say, guys, I am not the solution to all these problems here.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that's going to be held accountable. And I will acknowledge it's on my shoulders. Bad news belongs with me. Good news is all of yours to embrace. So this tension exists at all times. How does the leader manage that tension to be vulnerable, understanding, accepting of contrarian views, and at the same time, the pressures from above that says, go, 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 more, faster.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I look forward off camera to being with you guys in a couple of weeks, and maybe there'll be a moment we can spend keeping this going. This is incredibly helpful.
Well, no, this is great. I am really, I'm honored to be a part of these conversations. So thank you for including me.
Spider, thank you as always. Give my best to your bride, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Foster.
It's not often that anyone can claim that a conversation with a retired 3-star general was fun, but talking with Spider Marks is always that. I leave energized and smarter, with a degree of clarity about the complex task of leading people than I started with. How he learned and applies his well-earned wisdom comes through to how he leads people. And that's the point of this podcast series, what we can learn from those in the trenches to be better leaders. Set the table, invite cool people, magic happens. My gratitude to General Spider Marks for his time and insights. Let's chat again in about a week, shall we? Until then, step wise.
Thank you for listening to Stepwise. Stepwise is brought to you by Dr. Foster Mobley. Edited and promoted by Zetis. You can listen to more episodes wherever you stream podcasts. Find out more at fostermobleymT.com or follow us on social media at Foster Mobley. That's FOSTERMOBLEY. We look forward to having an inspiring conversation with you soon.